last night, as I was browsing the internet, I came across this little Wally paper craft and thought to myself, how cool would it be if I can turn this piece of paper craft into an actual moving robot?
I first got started by pulling the image from the screen. Then I went ahead to cut out all the little bits and pieces.
This is going to take me about an hour to cut out, or at least 30 minutes. But I'm sure in the video, it's gonna be a couple of seconds.
With all the parts cut out, I went ahead to start sticking him together.
So next we have to piece all of this together, which shouldn't be too difficult considering this was made for a child. Kind of looks like a little sword. I'm gonna try and fold these two, assuming you fold it like this. Okay, so this folds into a little square. That's one down. I'm not sure what this thing is, but I hope it will help me make better folds. I think I actually should use hot glue for this. Open for business. So here is the final product. I don't think I did it correct because there's a lot of pieces left over. He's kind of missing one of his arms or his hands because I lost a piece somewhere. But overall though, not too bad. So the next step is to get some electronics in him so he can start moving around.
So I went online to gather all the electronics I would need, and before the parts would arrive, I found Wally's other little hand and sticked it on. Eventually, when the electronics would arrive, I encountered a small problem.
I'm not sure if you can tell, but every component here is just way bigger than the actual robot. Here's the motors for the wheels, and here's the motor controllers. Everything is just much bigger than the robot itself.
Which meant I either had to go back online and find smaller little parts that will fit inside of a robot, or...
So we might have to print out a bigger robot. It's big.
Fearing a giant paper robot might be too flimsy, I thought it would be a good idea to stick all of these parts to some cardboard for some extra support. Because this cardboard was so thick, I used a razor blade to make the pretty cuts and finished it off with some scissors. With the added cardboard, it would take me much longer to cut out all the robot parts and fold them together. Good thing I have this great background music for you to listen to.
So I'm gonna use this piece of cardboard to make the tracks. But what I should do beforehand is just roll up this cardboard, give it all the flexibility it will need to go around the frame of the wheels. Looks like it's raining outside. So before I start sticking this little robot together, I'm first going to add some motors to his joints which will allow him to move around. So in the bottom of each of his legs, I'm going to add 2 of these little gear motors. Just gonna lay them next to one another like this. Add a little bit of glue and connect them together. And do the same on the other side, using less glue this time. And next, I'm going to connect the motors to one another and add a little bit of wire that is going to connect to the motor controllers. And add these wooden wheels I made.
Seems like I would need more space for these roller skates to fit into, so I had to trim down the tracks a bit. And measured and cut a few popsicle sticks, which will be glued to the skate frames.
So before I glue the wheels inside of this frame, I first need to make a hole and poke the wires through it, like that.
Then I glued the pre-cut popsicle sticks to the skate frames and used their extended reeds to be sticked on the inside of the tracks.
I probably will have to paint this black, so it kind of hides all the wooden mechanics. But honestly, who's gonna look underneath it? I'm gonna use one of these bars and just make a hole in the center here and fish the motor wires through it like this. And glue the bars to the legs.
Next, I made a small hole in the bottom of the cube in the center to allow the motor wires to pass through, and stuck the cube to the tracks. Unfortunately, I glued on the cube a bit skew, but the great thing about hot glue is you can always just heat it up to separate the two parts and try to get it right the second time around.
It's nice and sturdy. Can you see it yet?
Wally!
So for elbow and arm movement, I'm going to use these tiny little gear motors, which I happen to have laying around. So I'm going to make a little hole here where the solder is going to be placed. It always pains me to drill holes through the cardboard, but the wires have to go in somewhere. So I'm going to make a hole here in the center blocks to fit that motor shaft through. I'm going to add a tiny bit of glue in the motor case and stick that inside of the solder. So before I stick on this little solder block, I'm first going to add this motor, just put the wires through, and then add this little block motor.
I then removed the inner core of this coloring pencil and squeezed some glue into it and pushed it onto the motor shaft, not only to extend its reach but also to give the arm more leverage. And stick another pencil to the other motor and glued on his hand. As I was about to stick on his other little hand, something didn't seem quite right. For some reason, these silver little pistons seemed to look more like Wally hands than these triangular little black things. So I would stick on, back to front, the silver ones instead.
So next, I want to get the eyes installed, but I also want them to be able to move like this and make 2 holes through this tiny little bar to allow the eyes to go through. So I'm going to glue on a piece of wood over here. Kind of have to loosen them up because they're a little bit too tight. I want them to be able to move around freely. I probably did too well of a job on this one. So next I have to wrap a tiny bit of wire around here, plus a little loop, which will allow the motor to move the eyes up and down. First going to start with that little loop. I probably should have done this before I glued on the back ends of the eyelids. Kind of a tricky business this is. And you kind of want to make sure those holes are aligned like this. So how the motor is going to move the eyes around is just by inserting a piece of wire through those holes, and when it moves, or when the motor rotates, it should move the eyes like this.
I bent this piece of wire into an elbow and got it between each of the holes. Then I cut off a piece of dowel and stuck it to the motor shaft. After that, I glued the motor to the eye frame and wrapped the wire coming from the eyes around the dowel. Just to make sure everything is working, I connected a battery to test it out. Yeah, that's good. I used one of these remaining cubes to hide the motor and started making a neck for our little robot to hold the head in place.
So I also have to cut this at an angle. I can probably fit a motor in here to turn the head around. That's not gonna fit, so I'm just gonna hide that later. And just make a tiny little hole in the bottom here to allow that motor shaft to fit into.
Next, I made a hole in the top to allow the head and eye motor wires to pass through. And with Wally 80% complete, I called it a day.
So in the past, I would normally control my robots using this 10-channel RC controller I made and 2 receivers, which is basically 2 RC cars put together. But today we're upgrading. This is an ESP32, and for the last few months I adopted a new skill called programming, which enabled me to Bluetooth connect a PS4 controller to the ESP32 for more button functions, and overall it just looks more professional.
I plugged in the ESP to a terminal adapter and powered it on using a micro USB cable. Then I probed the terminals to find the grounded live inputs and connected to correct appropriate color-coded wires. Then I began searching for the output signal terminals that corresponds to each button and connected a jumper wire to each of them.
So next I'm going to wire the signal wires to these motor controllers, and from there to the motors. Not gonna need this anymore.
I took the live and neutral wire coming from the ESP32 and connected them to a battery, giving it its own power supply, and wired up a motor controller. At first, it seemed like I did something wrong as the motors weren't responding. So I inspected the connections I made and it worked.
Sick!
I'm going to glue on the motor controller and the terminal adapter to this piece of cardboard. After that, it was a very long day of wiring the ESP32 to the motor controllers and to the motors.
A lot of wires.
I covered the exposed wires with some electrical tape just to prevent what happened last time I did something like this, and got him on the floor to run more tests. He is a little top heavy, something I would have to address later, but again overall looking good.
Oh!
And after passing all his tests, I used all of the remaining parts to cover up all the exposed areas.
I had to cut out the eye frame a bit to cover the top of both eyes up.
These black triangles may have been his eyebrows all along.
So guys, that's gonna do it for this video. Tune in next week as I will be taking Wally to town and introducing him to the locals. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.